I couldn't resist when I saw the whole situation, and an uncontrollable desire made me enter the room. Hello, my name is Isabela. I'm 25 years old, and today I've decided to share something that changed my life in a way I never imagined. To begin with, I need to talk about someone who has always played a special role in my life, my stepfather. Ever since he joined our family more than 10 years ago, it was as if a missing piece had found its place. He has always known how to make me feel safe, listened to, and above all, important. When my parents separated, everything changed. My mother, busy with grief and starting over, seemed distant, lost in her own worries. It was then that his presence became even more striking. He wasn't just my mother's husband, but someone who understood me like no one else. I always felt that he saw in me what I often couldn't see myself. Our conversations were unique. He had a special way of listening to me, without judgment. It was with him that I would vent about the difficulties of college, the insecurities of work, and even the confusing relationships I was in. He knew when to advise me and, above all, when to just listen. I never felt like I was being invaded. On the contrary, he made me feel valued, as if what I had to say was important. When he left home, I felt an enormous emptiness. It wasn't just his physical absence, but the end of a routine that had become my refuge. Even so, the distance wasn't enough to erase what we had built. We continued to meet up, albeit sporadically. Dinners here and there, conversations about investments, the economy, and life. Each meeting felt like a little piece of what we had before, as if time had stopped for a few hours. The curious thing is that these moments were never planned in any special way. They happened naturally, as if they were part of who we were. He was practical, calm, and I always admired that. No matter what happened, he seemed to have a solution, a right word, a look that said everything would be fine. It was something rare, hard to explain. Perhaps that's why my parents' separation, although painful, brought something unexpected, a closeness between us. Without meaning to, we ended up connecting in a different way. There was no longer any family context, home routines or conversations interrupted by day-to-day commitments. It was as if we had created a space of our own, where time and circumstances didn't have so much weight. Over time, I began to realize how important these meetings had become for me. It wasn't just the exchange of ideas or the comfort of familiar company. There was something more. Maybe it was the security he always gave me, or maybe it was the simple feeling of being next to someone who really cared about me. I didn't know for sure, but I did know that I liked the way I felt in those moments. He was somehow a link to a past that I still valued, and a bridge to something new that I couldn't yet define. That day, it all started with a simple message from him, asking if I had dinner plans. It was an invitation I always accepted without hesitation. These meetings with him became part of a routine that somehow filled the void left by my parents' separation. He suggested a restaurant he loved, saying it was perfect for a good chat. I liked that side of him, always careful with the details. As he drove, the city seemed more vibrant than usual. The lights from the signs reflected in the car window, and I watched the landscape change between busy streets and quieter corners. He would comment on his work and the country's economic situation, and I would respond with the same lightness. It was like always, simple but comforting. It was in the middle of one of these casual exchanges that we passed a luxury motel. The imposing facade was eye-catching, with its strategically placed lights. Without thinking too much, I remarked, almost laughing, that the place looked like a 5-star hotel. He smiled, a smile that seemed to carry a secret, and replied that he already knew the place. I was surprised. It wasn't the kind of information I'd expected to hear from him, but I didn't ask any more either. I laughed and changed the subject, but his sentence stuck with me. How did he know? Why? It was something small, almost insignificant, but it bothered me in a way I couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the way he spoke, with a naturalness that seemed to hide something else. A few weeks later, I received another call. This time he invited me to a dance at the club where he was a member. The idea excited me. I liked getting out of the routine, and being with him always felt good. I chose a dress that balanced elegance and simplicity. I didn't want to overdo it, but at the same time I wanted him to notice that I looked good. The evening was everything I had hoped for and more. The room was full, the music was pleasant, and the wine glasses never seemed to run out. We talked about everything and nothing at the same time, and I felt more and more at ease. But at some point, something changed. Our gazes met more often than before. Every smile, every casual touch seemed to carry a different meaning, something that hadn't been there before. On the way home, silence set in, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a dense silence, full of thoughts that neither of us dared to verbalize. When we passed the motel again, the memory of that conversation resurfaced. This time, I took courage. I said that I was still curious to see the place. He smiled, this time more openly, and asked me, almost as if he'd been expecting it, "Do you want to see it now?" My answer was immediate, but it came out almost as a whisper. Yes. It was such a short word, but it seemed to carry a weight that I still couldn't understand. On the way back, the city seemed shrouded in a strange silence, as if even the sound of the cars had diminished to give us space. He drove with a calmness that made me feel safe, while my mind was racing. I didn't know if it was the effect of the wine, or that growing feeling of connection that I couldn't explain.
Like and subscribe now so you don't miss out on new stories.
And then we passed the motel again. The neon lights seemed even brighter, almost as if they were calling me. Without thinking too much, I let out the phrase that had been echoing in my head since the last time. I've always been curious to see what it's like inside. He turned his head towards me with that smile that seemed to see beyond what I was saying, and asked, "Do you want to meet now?" For a second, the world stopped. My heart raced and I felt my face heat up. It wasn't something I was expecting, but the courage the wine had given me spoke louder. I said yes, almost without believing my own words. When we entered, I was completely impressed. The room was much more than I had imagined. Spacious, elegant, with furniture that looked like it came out of a luxury catalog. The soft scent of flowers and the low lighting created an almost hypnotizing atmosphere. He seemed at ease, as if he were anywhere else. I, on the other hand, felt torn between the euphoria of being there and the nervousness of what it represented. We chatted about trivial things while we explored the space. He showed me how to control the lights, laughed at my amazement at the hot tub, and we even joked about the price of it all. Despite the tension in the air, nothing seemed forced. It was as if we were living a moment of adventure that neither of us had planned, but that we had both decided to enjoy. As we sat on the sofa, he started talking about things he rarely mentioned. He said that the years of hard work and careful investment had paid off in ways he had never imagined. He seemed genuinely proud, but what came next left me speechless. "I want you to know that if you ever need anything, you can count on me. I'm thinking of sharing some of it with you." Those words struck me like a thunderbolt. It wasn't just the idea of fortune. It was the way he said it. It was as if I was someone special, someone he trusted more than anyone else. My eyes filled with tears, but I disguised them by smiling. All I could do was say thank you, still not knowing what it meant to us. As we walked back to the car, I knew that something had changed. Not just in how we felt about each other, but in how I was beginning to see the world around me. After that night, something inside me changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Before, every meeting with him was like a safe haven, an exchange of affection and admiration that made me feel special. Now it felt like there was something more, something I couldn't name. I tried to push these thoughts away, to tell myself that it was just gratitude, but with every memory of his voice, his smile, or the way he looked at me, a new sensation took hold of me. I found myself thinking of him at random moments of the day. I remembered his words, the little gestures that said so much without needing to be explained. And when we met again, everything seemed to gain even more intensity. Every conversation, every exchange of glances seemed to be charged with an energy that I hadn't been able to identify before. It was on one of those days of confused thoughts that my cell phone rang. It was him. My heart leapt when I heard his voice. He asked how I was, said something banal about work, but then came the sentence I would never have expected. I can't stop thinking about the last time we met. For a moment, I couldn't react. I felt my whole body shudder. He had put into words what I had been trying to ignore. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice steady, but all I could manage was a hesitant, "I've been thinking about it a lot too." After a short silence, but one that seemed to carry 1,000 meanings, he continued. He said that over the last few months, he felt that our relationship had changed. He couldn't explain it, but something in him had changed too. It was as if we were connected by something bigger than the two of us, something that no rational explanation could justify. The confusion in my head seemed to multiply with every word. I wanted to ask him what he expected from all this, but I couldn't. My thoughts were too jumbled. At the same time, there was something comforting in what he said. It was as if he was giving me permission to accept what I felt, even if I didn't fully understand it. After the call, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Questions came like waves, one after the other. What did this mean for us? How did I really feel about him? And most importantly, how far was I willing to go to understand what was happening between us? The only thing I knew for sure was that this was no longer just admiration or affection. It was something much deeper, something that challenged me to face a truth that I might not have been ready to accept. The phone call we'd had the week before wouldn't leave my head. Every word said seemed to resonate in me like an echo, bringing up feelings that I was still trying to understand. That's why, when he invited me to his apartment at the weekend, I felt a mixture of anxiety and nervousness. It wasn't the first time I'd visited him, but after everything we'd shared, I knew that this meeting would carry a different weight. I arrived on time, wearing something simple, but that made me feel confident. He opened the door with a calm smile, but his eyes showed some of the same nervousness I felt. The apartment, as always, was impeccable, but that night it seemed more welcoming, almost as if he had prepared everything to make me feel at ease. The walls decorated with minimalist paintings, the bookshelf organized with books on history and economics, and the soft smell of coffee created an atmosphere that perfectly reflected who he was. We sat on the sofa, and the conversation flowed naturally. We talked about our jobs, the challenges we each faced, and even laughed at some memories of the time when he still lived with my mother. But as the hours passed, the conversation took on a depth I hadn't expected. He told me about dreams he had never mentioned before, places he wanted to visit, and even regrets he kept silent. As I listened, I realized how each word revealed a part of him that I didn't know. It was as if, at that moment, he was allowing me to see beyond the image I had always had of him. And at the same time, I felt that he was also seeing me in a different way. At one point, our hands accidentally touched, and instead of pulling them apart, we let them stay together for a few seconds. My heart raced, but at the same time there was a feeling of tranquility, as if that gesture needed no explanation. Our gazes met once again, and I felt butterflies in my stomach. It was a mixture of nervousness and anticipation, a feeling that seemed to grow with every second we spent together. When I finally said goodbye, I left the apartment with my mind racing. Every detail of that night was etched in my memory, from the way he looked at me to the words we exchanged. More than ever, I knew that something was changing between us. When I returned home that evening, every detail of the visit to the apartment seemed to dance in my mind. The touch of our hands, the long looks, the conversations that seemed to open doors to parts of us we had never shared before. It was clear that something had changed, but the question that haunted me was, what did it mean? I tried to distract my mind, but every attempt to ignore what I was feeling seemed futile. When I lay down, the pillow didn't seem to be able to bear the weight of my thoughts. On the one hand, there was guilt that I couldn't erase. On the other, there was an irresistible force that made me want to be close to him again. It was as if I was torn between what was right and what my heart desired. The following days were marked by growing anxiety. I looked at my cell phone every few minutes, waiting for a message, a call, any sign of him. When the message finally arrived, asking if we could meet up at the weekend, my heart raced. I said yes, almost without thinking, but the truth was that I was diving into something that I didn't know where it would end. Our meetings became frequent, always in discreet places, far from any familiar eyes. We felt the need to protect what we were experiencing, but that only made it more intense. With every conversation, every laugh, the bond between us seemed to grow stronger. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was just friendship, but I knew it was more than that. My mother, without suspecting anything, sometimes asked about him. She said he seemed distant, and asked if I had any news. I would try to deflect the subject by answering with something generic, but my voice seemed to tremble slightly, as if my body was giving away the double life I was living. These moments brought up an even more difficult question. How far was I willing to take this? There was a constant conflict between the weight of the secret and the happiness I felt in her arms. It was like living two lives at the same time. One where I was the usual Isabela, loving daughter, reliable friend, and another where I was someone who didn't know how to go back. The secret grew between us like an invisible wall. Although we tried to keep it simple, we knew it wasn't. There were times when I wanted to talk, to get things off my chest, to tell someone what was going on, but I knew that would destroy everything. I was trapped in a world that I had created for myself, and I still couldn't get out. As time went by, the intensity of my encounters with him seemed to grow, but life, as always, had its own peculiar way of complicating things. It was in one of the rare moments when I was trying to distract my mind that I met someone. I wasn't looking for that, but there he was, a kind, charming man who was so easy to like. We started going out, and before I knew it, we were in a relationship. At first, I thought it might be what I needed, an escape, a way to dispel the doubts that consumed me and bring a little normality to my life. He was incredible, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in me. We went for walks, laughed, and even shared dreams. But even in the happiest moments with him, there was something I couldn't ignore, the presence of my stepfather, like a constant shadow in my thoughts. It was as if there was an invisible bond that connected us. Every message from him, every invitation for a discreet meeting, made the ground shake beneath my feet. I tried to convince myself that it was time to walk away, but every time I met him again, everything came back with a force that left me breathless. What I felt for him went beyond all logic, and I couldn't understand why it seemed so impossible to control. Guilt followed me like a shadow, especially when I was with my boyfriend. He had no idea what was going on inside me, and I felt torn between two lives that seemed completely incompatible.
Click like now and subscribe to the channel to see more stories like this.
Sometimes, while we were together, I found myself wondering what my stepfather was doing, if he also thought about me in the same way I thought about him. It was unfair, I knew, not just to my boyfriend, but to myself. At night, alone in my room, my mind was a whirlwind. Unanswered questions haunted me. Was I being selfish to keep seeing my stepfather, for allowing him to occupy such a large space in my life? Or was it even more selfish to pretend I didn't feel anything? Between these thoughts, a single certainty emerged. Whatever I felt when I was with him, it was something that made me feel alive in a way I had never experienced before. I knew I couldn't go on like this forever. The double life, the implicit lies, and the secrets were piling up like a weight on my back. It was only a matter of time before something exploded. I began to think that I needed answers, some direction that would help me understand what was going on. The problem was that the more I searched for these answers, the more lost I felt. I reached a point where the thoughts seemed more than I could bear on my own. The sleepless nights, the days full of doubts, and the weight of what I was going through led me to a single conclusion. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed perspective. That's why I decided to share my story with you. Telling you everything wasn't an easy decision. Until now, the life I've led has been built in secret, in small moments stolen between two realities: my stepfather, my boyfriend, my mother, and myself, all trapped in a web that, every day, seems more impossible to untangle. There are times when I think about leaving everything behind, but what exactly is everything? My stepfather is more than just someone I've formed an emotional bond with. He's become an extension of who I am, even if in a way I never imagined. I ask myself all the time, am I wrong? Is it selfish to allow myself to experience something that makes me feel so alive, even though I know how complicated it makes everything? My boyfriend, on the other hand, is someone who treats me with so much affection, someone who doesn't deserve to be part of this chaos. And my mother? She has no idea that, while she's trying to get on with her life, I'm here, walking such an uncertain path, so full of secrets. Today, sitting here, typing every word, I feel like I need advice. I need to understand if this story makes sense to anyone else, or if it's just me, lost in a mess of my own making. The question that won't leave me is, what would you do if you were me? How would you deal with something that seems so big, so overwhelming, but at the same time brings a sense of belonging that is almost impossible to describe? The future is unknown. I don't know where all this will lead me. I may end up hurting everyone, including myself, but for now, all I know is that these moments have changed my life forever. I hope to find some clarity along the way, but in the meantime, I invite you to follow this journey with me. I want to keep sharing every bit of this story, listening to your opinions and sharing my deepest thoughts. My story with him hasn't come to an end yet. Perhaps I don't even know how it should end. I just hope that, somehow, there will be an answer to all this.
Don't let this opportunity pass you by. On the left, I've separated an exclusive video for you. On the right, I've left a playlist with videos you like. Click on the screen now and choose.